We'll start chapter 4 with a quick review of straight lines. And specifically, we're going to start with the slope-intercept form of the straight line, the linear function. So the slope-intercept form of the straight line is y equals mx plus b, which is the same as y equals b plus mx. Because 1 plus 2 is the same as 2 plus 1, it really doesn't matter. The order doesn't matter when you add two numbers. So if you remember again, the number multiplied to x is called the slope, and the other number is called it is the y-intercept. So the slope is the number multiplied to the explanatory variable, and the other number is the y-intercept. So it doesn't matter in which order we write these numbers. If we have to identify the slope, look for x and look for the number multiplied to x, and that is the slope. The other number is the y-intercept. Now, if you remember from algebra, the y-intercept is the point at which the straight line crosses the y-axis. So that's the y-intercept. Now, in this case, we have y equals a plus bx. It doesn't matter what letters we use to denote the slope and the intercept, as long as you remember that the number that is multiplied to the explanatory variable is the slope, and the other number is the intercept of the straight line. Now, since the y-intercept is the point where the line crosses the y-axis, this point, let's say that's a 3. Suppose the line crosses the y-axis at 3. If we had to write the point as an ordered pair, remember that the x-coordinate of a point lying on the y-axis is equal to 0. And in this case, the y-coordinate is 3. So we can say that the y-intercept is 3, and the point where the line crosses the y-axis is the ordered pair 0, 3. So remember that for any point on the y-axis, the x-coordinate has to equal 0. Now, what does it mean for the slope to be positive? Now, let's look at this line. So this line has positive slope. And how do we know it's a positive slope? Because it is a rising line. A rising line has positive slope. What exactly does that mean? Suppose I take an x here. Okay, let's say x is a 1. Okay, so the y corresponding to x equals 1 is, let's say, a 2. So when x is 1, y is equal to 2. Let's increase x. So when we increase x to 3, y increases as well. Let's say that's a 3 and that's a 4. So when x is 3, y is 4. So as we increase x, y increases as well. And that's how we get a rising line. So as the explanatory variable increases, the response variable increases as well. And that's when the slope is positive. If we had to describe a line with positive slope, it would be a line that is rising. Anything that looks like this, no matter how slowly it's rising or how steeply it's rising, these are different examples of positive slope. If the slope is negative, it would be a falling line. Okay, So a line like this would have negative slope. So let's put an x and y axis. Let's just say that this is the, so we're looking at let's say x equals 1. Let's see where the y sits. So we draw a vertical line to meet the line and then draw a line perpendicular to the y-axis. And let's just say this is a 2.8. So when x is 1, y is 2.8. Let's increase x to 3. So when x is 3, let's see, y, let's say, is roughly 2. So when x is 3, y is equal to 2. Notice what's happening to x here. X is increasing, right, from 1 to 3. And what's happening with the y is that y is decreasing. So as x increases, y decreases, and that's how we have a negative slope. So geometrically, if the slope of a line is negative, then you will see a line that's falling. And when I say falling, you have to always go from left to right. When you go from left to right, what you're doing is increasing the value of x. Okay, so when you scan the graph from left to right, if the line seems to be falling, then you can be sure that the slope is negative. Now, let's try to remember the definition of slope. So when you studied algebra, the definition of slope is rise over run. If you remember this, rise over run. Rise is vertical, run is horizontal. So rise would be the change in the vertical direction. So change in the y coordinate. And run would be the change in the horizontal direction. So it's change in the x. So change in y over change in x. Same thing as rise over run. So rise is vertical, run is horizontal. And that's how we get the vertical axis is the y-axis, horizontal is the x. So change in y in the numerator over the change in x, which is the same as saying that a change slope is the same as the change in the response variable over the change in the explanatory variable. Definition of intercept. Intercept is the point we just discussed where the line crosses the y-axis. If it is crossing the y-axis, its x coordinate has to equal 0. The intercept A is the value of the response variable when the explanatory variable is 0. So it's a point on the graph where when the explanatory variable is 0 and the response variable is A, so when I say explanatory, it's the x coordinate, response is the y coordinate. This number is called the y-intercept. It's the point where the line crosses the y-axis. Now, slope is a very important concept, so let's just try to understand what exactly the slope tells us about the line. So in this case, y equals 2x minus 3. The slope, m, is the number multiplied to the explanatory variable. In this case, it is 2. If it's 2, it is the same as positive 2. The other number is the y-intercept, negative 3. So that's the point where the graph of this line crosses the y-axis. So the slope, by definition, is change in y over change in x. change in y over change in x is the slope. Rise, y, which is vertical, run is x, which is horizontal. So we write it as 2 over 1. That's the same as 2. So that's plus 2 over plus 1. So now the change, so this is equal to the slope, which is the change in y over the change in x. So the change in y is a positive 2, the change in x is a positive 1. So the way we explain the meaning of slope is this. If we change x by 1 unit, if we increase, so a change can be positive or negative, a positive change is an increase. So if we increase x by 1 unit, y increases by 2 units. I say it increases because it's a positive change. So now let's look at another example. Y equals negative 2/3 x plus 4. So we'll first try to identify the slope. The number that is multiplied to x is the slope. The other number is the intercept. So the line passes through the point 0, 4, and this point lies on the y-axis, so it's the y-intercept. The slope is negative 2/3. Now negative 2/3 can be written in so many different ways. So negative 2/3 can be written as negative 2 over positive 3, which is the same as positive 2 over negative 3, which is the same as negative 2/3. It all means the same thing. So now let's write down the slope, which is change in y over change in x, which is equal to negative 2/3, and we'll write it as a fraction, negative 2 over positive 3, because it's the same thing. The change in y is negative 2, while the change in x, which is the denominator, is positive 3. A negative change is a decrease. A positive change is an increase. So the way we explain the slope is this. If x increases by 3 units, then y decreases by 2 units. We always start with the change in x because y depends on x. If we increase x, then y decreases. And the slope tells us precisely by what units x increases and what the resulting change in y is. So if x increases by specifically 3 units, then y decreases by 2 units. Suppose the equation of the line is y equals negative x plus 0. Then the slope is equal to negative 1. So the line is y equals negative x, which is the same as y equals negative x plus 0, right? Now that is the same as y equals negative 1 times x plus 0. So compare it to y equals mx plus b. The number multiplied to x is the slope. So the slope is equal to negative 1, which is the same as negative 1 over 1. And now if we have to explain slope, then it's better to write it as negative 1 over positive 1 or positive 1 over negative 1, either way. So let's write it as negative 1 over positive 1. So how do we explain the slope? We say that we always start with x. Remember that if x changes, y also changes because x is the independent variable and y depends on x. So we always start with x, which is the denominator. A positive sign is an increase. So as x increases by 1 unit, y decreases by 1 unit. Remember that the y, change in y is the numerator, the change in x is the denominator. So as x increases, because that's a positive sign, by 1 unit, y decreases, that because we have a negative sign